The sun beat down relentlessly on the Syrian desert in the summer of 1187, as the Crusader army, led by King Guy of Jerusalem, made a fateful decision. After months of tension with Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the Crusaders set out to reclaim the town of Tiberius, which had recently fallen to Saladin's forces. This march into the heart of enemy territory would be their undoing. Saladin deliberately targeted Tiberius as bait to lure the Crusader army into open battle on unfavorable terrain, the arid plains near the horns of Hattin, away from their fortified bases and water resources. The loss of Tiberius was a major blow to Crusader control over northern Galilee and the Sea of Galilee region, threatening supply routes and morale. The rising threat of Saladin. By the late 12th century, the Crusader states in the Holy Land were growing weaker, divided by internal struggles and political rivalries. The once powerful Kingdom of Jerusalem, established after the First Crusade, was now vulnerable. King Guy of Jerusalem, embroiled in disputes with his local lords, struggled to unite the fragmented Crusader forces. Meanwhile, a new and formidable threat had emerged. Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, had united most of the Muslim world under his banner. His vision was clear: to reclaim Jerusalem, the sacred city that had been under Christian control for nearly a century. Saladin, born Yusuf ibn Ibu in 1137 in Tikrit, was a Kurdish Muslim who began as a soldier in the service of Zinga ruler Nur al-Din. His military prowess led to his appointment in Egypt in 1169 under the Fatimid Caliphate. In 1171, he abolished that caliphate, establishing the Ayyubid dynasty and aligning Egypt with the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate. After Nur al-Din's death in 1174, Saladin expanded his power, conquering Damascus and uniting Syria by 1187, becoming Sultan. As Saladin's military presence in the region grew stronger, the Crusaders began to feel the pressure. They could no longer ignore the looming threat of his forces. His strategic brilliance and ability to unite his enemies meant the balance of power in the Holy Land was shifting rapidly. The Crusaders' inability to form a united front left them vulnerable, and the stage was set for an inevitable clash, one that would change the course of Crusades forever. By the summer of 1187, Saladin's forces had tightened their grip on the region, and the Crusaders, though aware of the growing threat, were divided and unsure of how to respond. King Guy of Jerusalem, eager to prove his leadership, made a fateful decision to march toward Tiberius, which had recently fallen to Saladin's army. The Crusaders were desperate to reclaim the town, but the decision to march through the Syrian desert without sufficient provisions was a dire mistake. The Crusader army, made up of knights, soldiers, and pilgrims, was unprepared for the challenges of the desert. As they ventured deeper into enemy territory, the heat became unbearable, and their access to water grew scarce. The march, already arduous, was further hidden by the Crusaders' internal divisions. Raymond III of Tripoli, one of the most powerful lords in the region, gave advice to avoid direct engagement, arguing Tiberius could hold out and the Saladin's army would tire. But he was ignored. His reluctance to participate created a fracture within the Crusader ranks, weakening their resolve. Meanwhile, Saladin, ever watchful, had positioned his forces to cut off any escape route. His soldiers harassed the Crusaders from afar, preventing them from reaching fresh water sources. The Crusaders' once proud army was growing weak from thirst and exhaustion, unable to retreat or advance with any effectiveness. As the Crusader army continued its ill-fated march toward Tiberius, they were unaware of the masterful trap Saladin was preparing. Unlike the Crusaders, who relied on brute force and hope, Saladin understood the importance of timing, positioning, and resource management. With his forces already positioned along the Golan Heights, Saladin knew he controlled the vital water resources the Crusaders desperately needed. His genius lay not only in the strength of his army, but in his ability to outmaneuver and outlast his enemies. Rather than engage the Crusaders immediately, Saladin's forces taunted and harassed them from a distance, making them advance further into the desert without respite. The constant pressure sapped the Crusaders' morale, while the desperate thirst and exhaustion mounted. Saladin strategically kept the Crusaders' focus on the march rather than preparing for battle. The Sultan had also anticipated the Crusaders' psychological state, knowing they were desperate for victory and hoping the momentum of their march would bring them closer to their goal. His patience paid off when the Crusaders, now fully within the trap, found themselves at Hattin, where Saladin had strategically set up an encirclement. The battle, though inevitable, was more than just a military clash. It was a culmination of Saladin's meticulous planning, forcing the Crusaders into a position where escape was no longer possible. By the dawn of 1187, the Crusader army, already weakened by thirst and exhaustion, faced the full might of Saladin's forces at Hattin. The Crusaders had marched blindly into a trap, and now they found themselves encircled on all sides, unable to escape. Saladin's army, numbering in the tens of thousands, held the high ground, positioning themselves on the Golan Heights, while the Crusaders, barely 20,000 to 25,000 men. This included roughly 1,200 knights already suffering from the effects of dehydration, trapped in a valley. The sun blazed down relentlessly, adding to their misery. Saladin's forces were composed of well-disciplined Mamluks, mounted archers, and infantry, each unit coordinated to perfection. They began attacking the Crusader army from the high ground with precise arrows, forcing the Crusaders to retreat further into the valley. As the Crusaders staggered under the assault, they were unable to regroup or even form a solid defense, their ranks broken by the relentless heat and fatigue. Despite their desperate situation, the Crusaders attempted a desperate counterattack. King Guy of Jerusalem, determined to lead his forces to victory, ordered a charge, but it was futile. The Crusaders, too exhausted and disorganized, struggled to move effectively. Saladin's forces cut them down as they attempted to charge, and many were struck down by arrows and spears before they could even make contact with the enemy. In the midst of the battle, Saladin's forces executed a critical maneuver. His Mamluks launched a devastating cavalry charge that scattered the Crusaders, forcing them into a tighter and more vulnerable formation. The Crusaders, now exhausted and demoralized, were picked off with ease. The heat and thirst, combined with the onslaught of arrows and mounted troops, rendered their efforts useless. The turning point came when Saladin's forces captured the True Cross, the most sacred Christian relic in the Crusader camp. The Crusaders saw the loss of the cross as an omen. It shattered their morale, symbolizing their defeat not only on the battlefield but spiritually as well. With the loss of their most precious relic and their leaders in disarray, the remaining Crusader forces broke into chaos. Saladin, with unmatched precision, ordered his forces to finish the battle. By the end of the day, most of the Crusader army was either dead or captured. King Guy of Jerusalem was taken prisoner, along with other high-ranking Crusaders. The rest of the soldiers were scattered or killed in the final onslaught. The battlefield was strewn with bodies, a grim testament to the scale of the defeat. The aftermath of the battle was catastrophic for the Crusaders. With their army scattered, Saladin wasted no time in capitalizing on his victory. The True Cross had been lost, and King Guy of Jerusalem and other king leaders were taken captive. The remaining Crusader forces were too disorganized and demoralized to offer any resistance. Saladin's forces swiftly reclaimed the cities of Galilee, Nablus, and Acre, effectively neutralizing any Crusader presence in the region. The most significant consequences, however, was the fall of Jerusalem. In September 1187, just 2 months after the battle, Saladin entered Jerusalem with little opposition. The Christian city, the symbol of the Crusader mission, was surrendered to him. The holy city, which had been under Christian control for nearly a century, was once again in Muslim hands, marking a turning point in the Crusades.